Now we'll get to business. Oral questions. Question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we now know the government's first vaccine deal with Chinese pharmaceutical giant CanSino fell apart almost immediately after the Prime Minister announced it. It only took a week for the Chinese state to stop the necessary material from being exported to Canada so research and production could happen. It was the only leading vaccine that the Liberal government was pushing to be made in Canada. Why did it take the government 3 months to admit that the CanSino deal had fallen apart?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, we knew that signing deals for vaccines with as many different companies as possible was going to be the best way of ensuring that Canadians made it through this pandemic. That's exactly what we did. We signed a record number of vaccine deals with potential vaccine makers, and that's why we now have more vaccine doses potentially per person than anyone else. Yes, we cast the net very wide. Some of the deals didn't work out, including the CanSino, but we secured early doses for Canadians through the deals we did agree to.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister says he cast the net wide. Well, Providence Therapeutics is a Canadian company that has been part of the COVID-19 vaccine race. They submitted a proposal to the Liberal government in April for a vaccine. They didn't hear back, Mr. Speaker, until August, the same time the government rolled out Pfizer and Moderna, who would not make vaccines in Canada. After months of global hoarding of PPE and supply issues in the first wave of the campaign, why did the Liberal government abandon the chance to make a vaccine here in Canada?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think most Canadians understand that what was incredibly important during this pandemic was to make our decisions informed by the recommendations of our top scientists and health officers and medical professionals, and that's what we did. We followed the advice of the Vaccine Task Force on who to sign deals with and how to move forward, but I'm very pleased to highlight that we've actually given $10 million to Providence Therapeutics for them to commence their clinical trials to support Made in Canada solutions as well. But science has guided us every step of the way.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the Prime Minister waited 5 months to even respond to a Canadian company that could make the vaccine here. And months are an eternity in the worldwide race for vaccines. In June, the National Research Council told committee that the CanSino agreement was still going ahead. In July, the government told CTV that the vaccine, the CanSino, was going to be produced in Canada. The government was negotiating with other manufacturers while all this was going on. Why didn't the government get the right to produce any of these vaccines in Canada when the Prime Minister knew that the CanSino deal was dead?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, this government based our decisions on the best recommendations of the top scientists and experts in vaccinations and epidemiology across the country to make the right decisions. That guided us every step of the way. Yes, we looked to sign deals with as many different companies as possible to ensure that we'd get the vaccines as they started to arrive for Canadians, and that's exactly what we're doing. We had a strong and aggressive plan to do that, and we're delivering for Canadians.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Actually, there's no deliveries for Canadians this week, Mr. Speaker. L'approvisionnement européen des vaccins avec
the European agreement or for delivery of European vaccines with Pfizer and Moderna is raising concerns for Canada. There is vaccine protectionism going on here. And ultimately, there is a price war happening with fierce competition on a global scale. Has this Prime Minister picked up the phone to call European leaders to ensure that our vaccines will be delivered? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker. An hour ago, I spoke to Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, to raise our concerns. We are all looking forward to receiving the vaccine doses that we bought under that contract. And I was reassured to hear that the transparency measures taken by Europe will not affect Pfizer and Moderna deliveries to Canada? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are frustrated and they are concerned about the issues with vaccine deliveries. In fact, their anxiety is reaching a high level with the new variants of COVID. Canadians deserve better, Mr. Speaker. When will this Prime Minister take action and tell Canadians the truth on the real vaccine delivery dates? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I find it a bit disturbing to hear the leader of the opposition play petty politics and suggest that we are not telling Canadians the truth. On the contrary, from the very beginning, we have shown rigor and transparency. We have been sharing all of our dates and projections that we receive from the vaccine companies with the provinces and territories. We will continue to be transparent. If the leader of the opposition really wants to reassure Canadians during this pandemic, he should start by avoiding misleading Canadians. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The federal government has a lot of responsibility for funding the Quebec and provincial healthcare systems. And the commitment made was for it to be up to 50%. In reality, that has never been the case. Earlier, I spoke with the Premier of Quebec as a leader of the Council of Federation. He will be speaking with the leader of the opposition shortly. What I want to know is whether in the new federal budget, which is supposed to be in preparation, I wish to know if federal healthcare transfers will be raised to 35% as has been requested. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am speaking regularly with the provincial leaders, including with the Premier of Quebec and leader of the Council of Federation. We will continue to increase health transfers. But for the moment, we are looking at the short term with the pandemic. We have spent millions and, in fact, billions of dollars in direct transfers to help Canadians throughout the country. We will continue to do so. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, I don't think those telephone conversations have gone so well. Quebec and the provinces want long-term predictability. And they want the transfers to be raised from 22 to 35%, which is $28 billion. Our parents, our grandparents, people in a vulnerable situation need health, equipment, and services. Is this Prime Minister saying no to all the premiers in Canada? And is this Prime Minister refusing to help our parents, grandparents, and seniors? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I, in fact, have a question for the leader of the Bloc Québécois. Why is he refusing to have us work together to better protect our parents and grandparents? We wish to put into place measures that will establish pan-Canadian standards to ensure that all seniors, regardless of their geographic location, will receive the best possible care. That is what we are working closely with various provinces to do, and I hope that Quebec will recognize that we must work together to better protect our parents and grandparents, instead of playing politics.
Merci, Monsieur le...
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The delays in vaccination have caused more COVID infections and deaths. Experts have been clear. Workplaces are responsible for a great deal of COVID transmission. Will this Prime Minister commit to improving access to paid sick leave in order to protect our workers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have been very proud to introduce new sick leave measures, which were voted in unanimously by all members in this House. We recognize how important that is. We will continue to work closely with the provinces and premiers, and we also hope that, as many provinces have already done, we hope the provinces will agree that we need paid sick leave and worker support measures. And the federal government has provided $8 or $9 out of 10 during this pandemic to support Canadians, and we will continue to do so.
Delays in the vaccine mean that more people will get infected and sadly more people will die. Experts have said one of the worst transmissions, one of the biggest transmissions of COVID-19 happen in workplaces. Experts also agree that one of the best tools we have to stop the spread of COVID-19 in workplaces is paid sick leave. So will the Prime Minister commit to making the existing federal program that we fought for broader, easier to access to protect workers and their communities?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we were pleased to bring forward paid sick leave for workers who aren't covered by their workplace. We were happy to have the support of all parties in the House to do just that, and we will continue to work with provinces and territories to ensure that every worker gets the right protection. We have done an awful lot from the federal level and are always looking to do more, but we also know that there are many things that we should be doing in partnership with the provinces, and look forward to continuing to work with willing provinces.
L'honorable député de Chicoutimi.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the provinces have had to speed up vaccinations due to pressure from the federal government, which had promised that doses would reach Canada regularly every week. But this week, Pfizer will be delivering 0 doses, and next week, just a little more than 0. But Quebec is ready and able to administer 250,000 doses a week. Canadians and Quebecers are tired of being sold a bill of goods. When will these promised doses arrive? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we knew that when it came to developing these vaccines for the whole planet, we knew that there would be some difficulties along the way when it came to manufacturing. This delay with Pfizer is regrettable, but in a few weeks, Pfizer will be sending us hundreds of thousands of doses a week once more. And we will still be able to reach all of our goals, whether for the end of March, the end of April, or even to have everyone vaccinated by September. We will deliver for Canadians. We know how important that is. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister keeps saying that we have a portfolio of vaccines, but that's no good if we can't actually get our hands on them. There's no transparency or consistency here, and that is creating disorder. The truth is that the Prime Minister bungled the contract negotiations. Provinces are left to make decisions with very little information. Could this Prime Minister show some transparency and make the contracts public? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this question is nonsense because we have shown transparency from the very beginning. We immediately shared our projections about the vaccines with the provinces and territories. And we negotiated many contracts with many different companies, and that is helping us to minimize the impact of supply chain issues like the one we're seeing now with Pfizer. And because Pfizer is retooling its manufacturing plant, it will be able to send us even more doses in a few weeks. We will continue to be there to deliver vaccines for Canadians.
Calgary Nose Hill.
Canada is receiving 0 doses of COVID-19 vaccines this week, even though other countries are getting plane loads of them. Last night, the Minister of Procurement said that Canada has the right to sue companies that break vaccine contracts with us. So is the Prime Minister planning on suing any company for failing to deliver much-needed vaccines to Canada, or did he negotiate such bad terms that he doesn't have a leg to stand on?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm happy to correct the member from Calgary Nose Hill. The contract and the expectations for the Pfizer vaccine is to receive 4 million doses by the end of February, and we are very much, end of March. We are very much on track for that. Yes, there is a temporary disruption because they are improving the factory in Belgium that produces our vaccines, but within a few weeks, they'll be sending us more even than the hundreds of of thousands we were receiving before, and we will be on track to fulfill all those responsibilities we laid out for Canadians.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, I'm happy to correct the Prime Minister. We actually received 8% of what he said we would receive last month in the same period. So it's really one or the other. He either negotiated an ironclad contract that would allow us to have recourse and get vaccines, or he completely failed. We don't have any recourse, and the rest of the world is getting vaccines, and we aren't. Which one is it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to speak with the heads of Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca over the past few days, and I can assure you that Canada is very much on track to continuing to receive doses of vaccines for Canadians. We are on track to getting more than 3 million Canadians vaccinated by the end of Q1, as we said from the very beginning, and we will have all Canadians who want to be vaccinated by September of 2021. That is us delivering on the commitment we made to Canadians that we'd have their backs.
L'honorable député de Louis Saint Laurent.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, in September, this government introduced a 50-page bill at the last minute, and we had to get it adopted within a single day. And the result of that is that there are some issues with the legislation. For example, giving $1,000 to Canadians coming back from non-essential travel, which makes no sense. We need to correct that. And yesterday I tabled the motion to enable the government to introduce a bill that would fix this problem immediately. But unfortunately, this government refused. Why is this Prime Minister refusing to work with us in a constructive, cooperative manner to fix this scandal? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we tabled a motion for unanimous consent in the House of Commons in order to improve and fix this loophole in the bill. A bill which, as my colleague said, was adopted by all members in this House. Unfortunately, the Conservatives did not want to give unanimous consent to fix the issue right away. We will continue to work with parties in the House to fix this problem as quickly as possible. Because no, indeed, those coming back from non-essential travel should not be able to access that money, and we will correct the situation with or without the Conservative support. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. We all know that the Prime Minister doesn't like working with the House of Commons, but that's the issue. He introduced the bill in September. We just had one day to debate it, and that's why there are problems. And then now we're being told to just we're being told that we should just accept a new piece of legislation, just pass it without any debate. No, that would just be to make the same mistake again. Once again, pass it in a hurry and make mistakes. We simply want to debate the bill properly. Why not introduce a new bill right after a question period so that we can all debate it, work on it, and vote in favor of it? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, we often hear this type of thing from the Conservatives. We're being told that we helped Canadians too quickly. We reacted too quickly. We were too generous towards senior students, workers. Mr. Speaker, during this pandemic, we made a simple promise to Canadians that we would be there to help them in whatever way necessary, for as long as is necessary, and that's exactly what we're doing. Indeed, when we're working quickly to help everyone, we do need to make corrections. And that is why we are fixing some gaps that no one in any of the parties noticed when we first passed this bill. The honourable member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we know that Pfizer will not be delivering vaccines from Europe this week. We also know that Pfizer is producing vaccines in Michigan, just across the border. But Pfizer cannot sell these vaccines to Quebecers or Canadians because of a decree passed by President Trump. But we also know that Joe Biden is the president now. And the Prime Minister spoke to President Biden only last Friday. Did he ask the President for an exception to this decree for Canada to compensate for the lack of European vaccines? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it was a real pleasure to speak with Joe Biden. Last week, we spoke about vaccination, the vaccine supply, and what we can do together as partners to keep our citizens safe during the COVID pandemic. And in order to vaccinate everyone as quickly as possible, we will continue to work with our American friends in order to do everything that's necessary to help Canadians and everyone as quickly as possible. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we have a real problem. Canada is not producing vaccines. The US is not supplying us with any, and Europe is threatening to stop. Now, we just learned that the Prime Minister spoke with the European Commission, but that doesn't reassure me at all. He could have spoken to the American government. He could have complained that the Americans canceled Keystone, they're going to shove Buy American down our throats. He could have asked them to compensate by sending us some vaccines to compensate for the lack of vaccines from Europe. That's what you call the art of negotiation. Will this Prime Minister finally wake up and make sure that Canadians get the vaccine? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've been working with a difficult administration in the US for 4 years. But we nonetheless defended supply management, cultural exemptions, steel and aluminum workers, even in difficult protectionistic situations with the former administration. We are working in a positive manner together on COVID and climate change with the new American administration. And we will continue to be very close in everything that we do to ensure that we're there for Canadians.
For Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister is a good storyteller, but never fails to disappoint on results. For months, we've been calling on him to take action on Keystone XL. The end results are starkly clear. Now, the Governor of Michigan wishes to cancel Enbridge's Line 5 easement, which would seriously affect workers and consumers in Ontario and Quebec. Since this outcome would negatively impact millions of Canadians, will the Prime Minister take action now so that more Canadian workers and families are not simply disappointed and left in the cold?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 7 years, I have defended the Keystone XL pipeline, including to American Democrats, and have continued to every step of the way. In my conversation with President Biden, with Special Envoy Kerry, we have talked about Keystone XL. We've talked about energy security. I have emphasized the interconnectedness and the opportunity for us to work together to create good jobs in the energy sector and indeed across our economies by working together in North America, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Well, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of jobs in Ontario depend on the operation of Enbridge's Line 5. In November, the Governor of Michigan decided to revoke the easement, and this has allowed this pipeline to operate safely for decades. Line 5 was not mentioned in the Prime Minister's readout of his call with President Biden last week or his call with John Kerry last night. Why hasn't Line 5 specifically, the thousands of jobs, the decades of a safe track record, why hasn't that been a priority for this Prime Minister?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think all Canadians know that consistently this government has stood up for Canadian interests with a challenging situation south of the border over the past 4 years. We defended our steel and aluminum workers. We defended our supply management. We protected our most important trading relationship by renegotiating and even improving NAFTA. And we are going to continue to work to ensure energy security, jobs for Canadians, and the fight against climate change close hand in hand with the American government.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, President Biden's new Buy America executive order contains much tougher rules than we've ever seen before, all but shutting out Canadian businesses from U.S. government contracts. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce says this will have a chilling effect on businesses and jobs. The Liberals failed to negotiate Canada's participation in Chapter 13 of CUSMA, which addresses government procurement. The Liberals' trade failures just keep piling up. Is the Prime Minister negotiating Buy America exemptions for Canadian businesses?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 4 years, we saw one of the most protectionistic administrations the United States has ever had. And we were able consistently to defend Canadian interests, to stand up for Canadian workers, and to ensure our continued access to the American market and free trade. We will continue to work with this new administration in much more positive ways to be able to defend Canadian jobs and interests. I highlighted our concerns with Buy American directly to the President, and he committed that we would work together to ensure that we're creating jobs and prosperity for both of our countries.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in this pandemic, we're hitting record cases. Canadians are worried, and they think there's no plan when zero vaccines come and the weeks say we'll receive an unknown amount. The Prime Minister is suggesting we're misleading Canadians when we ask questions on the very documents they're presenting from our health motion last fall that he opposed. Questions about CanSino, questions about failures to deliver what he promised last month. The Prime Minister prorogued Parliament, has kept contracts hidden, and has not released documents to allow us to do better. Last month, he promised vaccines, and we're only going to receive 8%. Will he apologize to Canadians for dropping the ball on vaccines?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while the Conservatives yet again try and score cheap political points, we are focused on delivering for Canadians. That's why we have delivered over 1 million vaccines to the provinces and territories, while hundreds of thousands of Canadians, vulnerable Canadians, have been vaccinated, while we continue to work with vaccine companies around the world to get those deliveries of vaccines to Canada. We will be receiving hundreds of thousands of Pfizer doses in just a few weeks, more than we had before, so we can deliver what we promised to Canadians.
Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, over the holidays, the government sent anxiety-inducing letters to close to 500,000 Canadians, most of whom applied for CERB in good faith, some who were given incorrect information by the government, a government who's now threatening to make them pay back thousands of dollars in the middle of a pandemic. At the same time, this Prime Minister refuses to make companies like Imperial Oil, who took the wage subsidy, then handed out millions to their shareholders and CEOs, pay back a single cent. Why are the Liberals going after Canadians who are struggling, who did nothing wrong, but refusing to hold their corporate friends accountable?
There's no translation. We have a problem with the interpretation. Let me look at the technical team to ensure that it is all working correctly.
Okay.
Is the interpretation working?
Okay, I'll speak in English, make sure that everybody's hearing me in French. Oui, c'est beau. Okay.
It's working? Okay, we will continue. The Honourable...
Pardon?
I apologize. No, it's working? Okay.
Attendez une minute, je vais vérifier.
Just a moment, let me verify.
To be certain that everyone understood the question, maybe the Honourable Member for Victoria can repeat her question, and translation will kick in, and the answer will be there. The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, over the holidays, the government sent anxiety-inducing letters to close to 500,000 Canadians, most of whom applied for CERB in good faith, some who were given incorrect information by the government, a government who's now threatening to make them pay back thousands of dollars in the middle of a pandemic. At the same time, this Prime Minister refuses to make companies like Imperial Oil, who took the wage subsidy, then handed out millions to shareholders and CEOs, pay back a single cent. Why are the Liberals going after Canadians who are struggling, who did nothing wrong, but refusing to hold their corporate friends accountable?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of this pandemic, we made a straightforward promise to Canadians that we would have their backs. And that's exactly what we did, sending out unprecedented help to millions of Canadians who suddenly found themselves unable to work or without a job because of this pandemic. We have continued to support Canadians, and to Canadians who are worried, we will work with them to ensure that there are no penalties and no late fees involved in having misunderstood input, and we will work with them on a case-by-case basis. At the same time, we will continue to ensure that all the rules were enforced, and anyone who is profiteering or taking advantage of the processes will have.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
In his first days in office, the new U.S. president has signed a number of executive orders, including pausing federal student loan payments. President Biden stated, "Too many Americans are struggling to pay for basic necessities and to provide for their families." The same can be said here in Canada. In November, this House unanimously supported our NDP motion calling to extend the moratorium on repaying student loans until May 31st, 2021. Yet still there is no action from this government. Why is the Prime Minister content with breaking his promise to students and leaving them to struggle?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that young people are always hardest hit by economic shocks and downturns, and the potential scarring that could follow them for years of missed opportunities because of this pandemic are significant. That's why we move forward in unprecedented measures with the CERB for Students, for example, with direct supports for young people, with creation of new jobs and new opportunities for young people, and yes, with forgiveness of student loans. We will continue to work with all parties in the House to support young people because we need them to continue to contribute to how we get through this pandemic and help us build a better world afterwards.
The honourable member for Toronto Centre. The honourable member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, today we observe International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which commemorates the 6 million Jews and 11 million others who were murdered by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Can the Prime Minister please tell this House what our government is doing to combat anti-Semitism and honor the lives of those lost in the Holocaust?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Toronto Centre for her question. Today, we honour the memories of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. We pledge to tell their stories so that the horrors of the Holocaust could never happen again. We have formally adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and appointed the Honourable Irwin Cotler to lead Canada's efforts to promote Holocaust remembrance and combat anti-Semitism abroad. We will always stand with the Jewish community and fight anti-Semitism wherever and whenever it occurs.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. When a worker quits their job, that worker is not entitled to employment insurance. It applies to all workers except to the former Governor General personally chosen by this Prime Minister. For the friends of the Prime Minister leaving their jobs, it's the golden retirement. We're talking about $150,000 a year for life and an expense account that's a similar amount. Toxic work environment, criticism, humiliation, intimidating physical contact. The examples are serious and not new. The Prime Minister would have had to turn a blind eye not to know. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility today for that decision? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. As soon as we heard the allegations in the newspapers last summer, we started an independent, rigorous process in order to investigate and review the working conditions at Rideau Hall. We know that all Canadians deserve to have a safe work environment. We thank all workers at Rideau Hall for the exceptional work that they have always done in order to help this country and be worthy of the services provided to Canadians. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The Prime Minister is washing his hands of that decision, and that's exactly what happens when the Prime Minister has this happen. There was a wonderful, excellent, nonpartisan vice-regal appointment process in place to avoid this kind of fiasco that the Prime Minister has mired us in. Toxic work environment, unverified past history, instead of chose a big name while ignoring what was actually hiding behind it. Once again, the Prime Minister's judgment is to blame. Will he end the golden retirement for this Governor General? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will look at all the processes in place and improve them if need be. We expect that everyone who serves this country does so with dignity and upholds the expectations that we all have of that office, we also want to ensure that everyone who works for the government or who works anywhere in this country does so in a safe work environment. And that is what we all expect, and that is what we will continue to work for.
St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals just committed $90 million in new funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Classroom materials distributed to Palestinian students encourage them to, quote, defend the motherland with blood, portray child-murdering terrorists as heroes, and call Israel the enemy. Will the government suspend funding to UNRWA and commit to aid for Palestinians through alternate means, just as the previous Conservative government did, and more recently, just as the Netherlands and Switzerland did?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to engage in international development in many projects around the world. Our support and our presence in UNRWA continues to ensure that the materials and the funds that are vehicled to the Palestinians are done in the right way. We will continue to stand up for a two-state solution for the kind of peace that we need to see through direct negotiations between both Israel and the Palestinian state.
The Honourable Member for Charles Woods, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister just said a moment ago he'd stand up to anti-Semitism whenever and wherever it occurs. Well, here it is. Stand up to it. The fact of the matter is that $90 million in taxpayers' dollars are being used to fund UNRWA's indoctrination of children by inciting violence toward Jews. This government talks about supporting a peaceful two-state solution, yet we see funding of an agency working to push hatred, not peace. On this Holocaust Remembrance Day, and with anti-Semitism across the world on the rise, how does the Prime Minister justify the use of taxpayer dollars to fund the teaching of hatred toward Jews?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have long tried to use politics as approaches like this to score cheap points and make politics on the backs of intolerance and victims. We will continue to do the right thing, and that means, yes, standing up for Israel, standing up for a two-state solution, working closely with all our partners in the region, and yes, funding development aid for the most vulnerable, including through UNRWA. That is something this government stands for.
Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes, Verchères. Mr. Speaker, everyone in Quebec is asking the Prime Minister the same thing. Non-essential flights should be banned, ensure that quarantine is respected, and reimburse people who booked and then canceled flights. It's now January 27th. The Prime Minister has not yet resolved the problems that occurred before Christmas. He waited until all the travelers had come back for 3 weeks from their trips, and still nothing has happened. He waited until the UK variant of the virus hit seniors' homes in Ontario. Time for waiting is over. When will he take action? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I don't want my colleague by misfortune to mislead Canadians. Let me reassure everybody that since March, we have among the most strictest border measures in the world. People without a residence in Canada cannot come into Canada. This is a measure that we started right from the start. We have put in place also a mandatory quarantine for everybody returning to Canada. This is followed up on by the local Canada Health authorities and the police. For a number of weeks, we've now been requiring a negative test. The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes, Verchères. Mr. Speaker, he's talking to me about a quarantine, but the quarantine isn't even being respected. There is no easy solution. It's time to act. The Prime Minister was elected to make the hard decision. Quebec is making these hard decisions on a daily basis. Quebec has a curfew. That's a difficult decision. Quebec is cutting services in hospitals, deciding who to treat or not. That's a hard decision. Quebec has closed stores. It's shut down businesses. The Prime Minister has to shut the border for non-essential travel. When will he do his job, make the hard decisions, and take action to ensure that people are safe. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Since the very beginning, Mr. Speaker, we put in place the strictest measures in the world to protect our borders. And in fact, we will do more. We are making the difficult decisions. We were there to help the government of Quebec and facilitate these difficult decisions that are being made by spending and investing billions of dollars for Quebec businesses, for Quebec families, for Quebec workers who need help. The federal government has been there to provide direct assistance to Quebecers, like to all Canadians, and we will continue to do this. This is a difficult process, but not a hard decision because...
Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Many Canadians are counting on the Canadian Emergency and Recovery Benefits to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. Unfortunately, the people who need it the most are given the runaround, wrongly labeled ineligible, or trapped without support as processing backlogs force them to wait for months. 10 months later, and still, the paralyzing bureaucracy, confusion, and loopholes in these programs continue to persist. This must be a priority. When will this government fix the Emergency and Recovery Benefits Program?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while Conservatives continue to attack our hardworking public servants, we have worked with them while they have made heroic efforts to get money out to Canadians across the country in record time, in record means, in record numbers to help Canadians. While the Conservative finance critic continues to say, oh, we shouldn't have helped people so much, we shouldn't have been helping families, we should have given more money to businesses, we stayed focused on helping Canadians through this. A simple promise, Mr. Speaker, we would have Canadians' backs. That's what we've done every step of the way, despite the critiques of the Conservatives that we were doing too much, too fast.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the government asked for unanimous consent to pass a bill correcting the paid sick leave loophole in the rushed Canada Recovery Benefits legislation that can be exploited by non-essential travelers, vacationers. The House said no. Better to study at committee to get it right this time. The Liberals then refused to table the legislation. Mr. Speaker, what could be so urgent it needed to be passed without study, but is now so unimportant the Liberals won't introduce it for proper consideration?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, we hear that approach from the Conservatives that we rushed to help Canadians in the spring, that we rushed to help Canadians in the fall. Yes, we did. We are in a global pandemic right now, and we needed to put measures out as quickly as possible to support Canadians. And of course, we didn't get everything perfect. Nobody does. But we made the necessary moves to deliver support to millions of Canadians, to keep food on the table and to help them out. And every step of the way, Conservatives grumbled that we were doing too much, too fast, that we shouldn't be helping Canadians that much. Well, we disagree, Mr. Speaker. We will be there for Canadians. We will continue to have their backs.
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
The old deflect, dissemble. But to another Liberal snafu, Mr. Speaker, thousands of Canadians who've applied for EI since CERB have been refused, told to apply for the CRB. But they're rejected because they made the original EI claim. Service Canada confirms the denials are improper. The CRA says it's trying to fix its faulty computer codes. But for many, family savings have run out. There's no money for groceries. Mr. Speaker, glib assurances are unacceptable. Where's the fix?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have delivered help to millions of vulnerable Canadians, but we know there is much more to do. We are working on repairing some of these gaps and ensure that the most vulnerable Canadians get the support they need. This is something that Canadians are expecting, are counting on. And as I said from the very beginning, this government will continue to be there to do everything necessary to help Canadians get through this.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint Louis. Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago this week, the first COVID case in Canada was detected. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have taken rapid and effective measures to stop the spread of the virus. Can the Prime Minister inform Canadians what measures were taken at our borders to guarantee the safety of all Canadians? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I want to thank the member for Lac Saint Louis for his question and his leadership and hard work within our caucus. Since March, our borders have been closed to foreign travelers. We implemented a 14-day mandatory quarantine for all those returning to Canada and a mandatory negative test prior to boarding a flight to come back to Canada. Our strict border measures are adapted to a changing situation, and it's working. All these measures work, and new measures will be announced shortly.
The evidence is overwhelming. China is committing genocide against the Uyghurs through population controls, sexual violence, and mass detentions. Yet all we get from this Liberal government are vague expressions of concern and empty promises of an investigation. The time for action is now. What specific steps is this Prime Minister taking to formally request that China allow such an investigation? And when will he finally declare these atrocities to be a genocide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We, of course, take allegations of genocide extremely seriously and are working with the United States and our partners to move forward on concerted action. We recognize, as I have recognized directly to the leaders of China, the concerns around human rights violations in Xinjiang, and we will continue to work with the global community for transparency, for accountability, and for clarity in terms of what is happening in Xinjiang.
Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in response to a question about the Uyghur genocide, the Foreign Affairs Minister said the government is calling upon China to do two things. First, allow unfettered access to the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. And second, allow an independent, impartial committee of experts to enter China. Has the government formally made these two requests of the Chinese government, either through the Chinese ambassador to Canada or through Ambassador Barton?
Prime Minister.
We take the situation faced by the Uyghurs in Xinjiang extremely seriously, which is why we've been bringing up this issue for years at all levels of Chinese government. We're working with our allies on assuring access for the UN Special Representative and more transparency into what is going on there. We need to hold China to account as a community of nations, and that's exactly what we're going to continue to do.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, it's Holocaust Memorial Day. We're asking the Prime Minister direct questions about a contemporary genocide, and he's refusing to answer simple, direct questions. Erwin Kotler, the government's own special envoy for Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism, agrees that Canada must recognize and respond to this genocide. Independent investigations have already been conducted. They've drawn on survivor testimony, satellite imagery, and leaked Chinese government data. The evidence is clear. The investigations have been done. The victims have testified. The government should believe them. Why is the Prime Minister still sitting on the fence and refusing to answer questions and recognize this genocide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have been highlighting our deep concerns about the situation in Xinjiang for many years to the Chinese government. We have also worked very, very closely with our international partners on holding them to account. We take allegations of genocide extraordinarily seriously. That's why we are going through the right processes in terms of establishing our perspective and our official position on that. I understand the desire to move quickly on that, but it's also extremely important that we move rigorously on it.
Honourable Member for Markham Stouffville.
Mr. Speaker, we have a range of tools in our fight against COVID-19, and having access to quick test results is important in stopping the spread. Can the Prime Minister provide an update on the status of rapid testing in Canada?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Markham Stouffville for her question and her excellent work. Testing is one of the most important tools we have to stop the spread of COVID-19. We're working around the clock on the approval and procurement of new testing technologies. We have approved 6 rapid tests to date and sent almost 15.9 million rapid tests to provinces and territories over the past months. Even yesterday, we shipped almost 250,000 PanBio tests to Ontario. We will continue working with industry, with provinces and territories and public health experts to ensure our communities have the tools they need to keep Canadians safe.
Honorable député.
The honourable member for Rosemount Petite Patrie. Air Canada flight attendants are victims of a serious injustice. The Liberals don't care at all about workers and are allowing major companies like Air Canada to use the wage subsidy to their advantage and with impunity. Instead of maintaining ties with its thousands of employees, Air Canada is pocketing everything it can and is laying off 4 out of 5 flight attendants, thereby circumventing the main objective of the wage subsidy. Will the Liberals stop looking after the interests of big business and the rich, and will they finally look out for workers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The wage subsidy was put in place to help workers, and that is what it has done for millions of workers across the country. We will continue to ensure that the aid goes directly to workers, and any company that does not follow the guidelines and does not deliver those assistance in the right way to workers will have to deal with the consequences.